Live from Atlanta, Georgia, it's the Zach Ballinger Show, where we help you find your direction through passion and purpose. My name is Zach Ballinger. I am your host. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We've got a special guest. Before we get to that, we are streaming live via YouTube. So if you have any questions for me and the guest, pop them into the comment section. We'll make sure to get to them. Always, you can email me, zach@zachballinger.com. We will make sure to ask those questions. As you guys know, throughout 2021, we are bringing on career experts and gurus on the show to have them answer your questions, or for us to have a conversation where you can maybe take a couple of pearls out and apply them into your own career journey. And that's exactly what we're going to do here today. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining the show today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Zach.
So, Jeremy, can you tell me a little bit about your background first before we get started?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of have this slightly peculiar, almost double life at the moment. So by background, by training, by profession, I'm a lawyer, and I'm still a practicing lawyer, and I do that job. But I'm also in the process of kind of trying to transition out of being a lawyer. And the way I've started doing that, and maybe we'll dig into that a bit more in this conversation, is by starting a podcast, which is all about career change. So I feature guests who either have made significant career changes themselves. So there's the guy who was an IT professional for 30 years who's now a hypnotherapist, or the accountant who sold a practice and is now a canine behaviorist. And then the other kind of guest that I interview is more the coach type. So we might talk about particular topics such as finding your values, or how to handle difficult conversations at work, or maybe it's some wellness, health aspect. So trying to get sleep, the link between nutrition and how you feel, and all that sort of stuff. Really, the aim of the podcast being to help people enjoy themselves at work a bit more.
And for my audience, obviously, you can tell by the accent, Jeremy actually is in the UK. And so, this is interesting to have somebody from a different country to come on and talk to us about career development and how they see it. Talk to me, because there's a lot of pressure in the States to get a good education, to get as much education as you can, do well in school. You're kind of proof of that. You've done very well, obviously, to be able to pass your boards to become a lawyer. And you even to say you're a lawyer right now, how did you say, I think it's time for me to start transitioning out of a career that you worked so hard in your educational background to get into first? And what made you decide to make that change?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And you're right, law, like most professions, it's quite a grind, quite a slog to get into. But I just realized maybe 2 or 3 years ago that I just wasn't enjoying it. I wasn't living my dream. I was kind of helping others live theirs. I act in I suppose you'd call it the private client space. So I help individuals rather than companies. And, I was helping them do what they wanted to do, but I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. And I was kind of, going into work kind of going, I'm really not sure I want to do this. And I suppose initially I thought, well, this is kind of it until retirement. So maybe I'll look into what I can do to bring my retirement earlier. So are there things I can do to create a retirement pot, create an independent living and independent wealth beforehand? And as I went down that journey and started reading books about generating incomes from other sources and that sort of stuff, it kind of made me realize that I wasn't going to solve anything by just sticking what I was doing and hoping that I was going to be able to retire early. I needed to take some more positive steps. And so that kind of got me thinking much more about looking to change career myself, possibly start a business by myself. So I've got my own agency and my own autonomy. And starting with a podcast is a slightly off-beam way to start a new business and a new career, but it spoke to me. I listened to a lot of podcasts myself. Where I live in the UK, I happen to be in a town which is quite entrepreneurial. There's a lot of people who have started their own businesses. Maybe they started out here as a commuter, so they'd commute into London because that's where that's where all the good jobs are. But then a lot of people like me realised it wasn't for them, and so started their own thing. And the idea of talking to some of them and finding their stories just really appealed to me. And yeah, it's also tied up with my mum actually. She never seemed to enjoy her job a great deal. She took a career break to bring up me and my brother, and then when she went back to work, she qualified as an accountant, and she worked unbelievably hard to do that. She was doing part-time qualifications, working at the dining room table every evening, got there, qualified, got a good job, but quite regularly we'd have conversations where she clearly just wasn't particularly enjoying her job, and she was kind of marking time really, kind of resigned to doing this until retirement. um, well, she never made it. She got cancer and died in her mid-50s, and that was a heck of a wake-up call actually. It wasn't until a few years after that I really put two and two together and realized that, hey, I don't want to be in that position. I don't want to be finding myself as someone who is just waiting for retirement and might never get there. And so it was a few years later that I started really to think about, well, hang on, I don't want to, just wait and wait and wait. I need to make some decisions and take some action now.
Wow. That's an incredible story. You hit on a couple of themes that I just wanted to talk about from my perspective. I wrote the book, Don't Be a Zombie, How to Find a Career You Love. And what I talk about in there, it's okay, and your perfect example, not to like your job right now. It's completely okay. And it's okay to admit that. What's not okay is for you to say, hey, I hate my job, dread Mondays, thank God it's Friday. And you get into a situation where you say, I'm going to stay in this 20 years. And that's the plan. That shouldn't be the plan. There should be an exit strategy immediately when you've identified that. You identified another problem. 70% of Americans actually hate their jobs. So it's not an uncommon theme to meet somebody out there that we know, even in our inner circles, a lot of people that watch the show that don't like their jobs. But what are you going to do about it? It's time to take that action item. The third thing you hit on was life. I talk about that in my book and give some perspectives on life, that it's very short. And I think for a lot of us, we take it for granted. We think we have this infinite amount of time, but when you look back and you'll hear people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, they say, wow, I woke up one day and I was 60 years old. I woke up one day and I was 70 years old, and life passed me by and I was in a career that I didn't like. So you're going to spend 1/3 of your life hating your life that you have on earth. You don't know how long you get. We don't know the time period. So why not make a change and do something that you love and you actually enjoy? And so thank you for sharing that story. Now, what is your, tell us about your show. Like you kind of mentioned a little brief bit about it, but what is it? Why should people listen? What's kind of the topics? What's the theme? And tell us all about that.
Yeah, so why don't I start by describing who the show is for? Uh, the show is for you if you are a professional, you're maybe getting reasonably senior, perhaps you've been doing it for 10, 15, maybe 20 years. So you're getting into a position of some seniority, some experience, some expertise, some reputation as well. People are starting to take you quite seriously and recognizing you as an expert in whatever field you're in. You're probably in a position where you've got maybe life partner, children, mortgage, car, the usual sort of trappings that come with midlife. And Externally, things kind of look like they're pretty good. I mean, you're in a good, probably quite a well-paid job. As I say, everything in home life looks good, but the problem is that you're just not really satisfied with the work. The work doesn't satisfy you. You go to bed on a Sunday evening. You described it perfectly with just that feeling of, oh, it's Monday tomorrow. I really don't want to go to work. But you've got lots of fears about making a change. As you alluded to, you've worked hard to get to your profession. Are you just going to, throw it all away? If you're not going to do that, what are you going to do? There's lots of questions of identity wrapped up with what you do. If I'm not a lawyer, an accountant, a doctor, an architect, what am I? There's the more, I suppose you'd say it, material fears, like, well, I'm pretty well paid now. If I change career, am I going to be taking a pay cut? Am I going to be in a situation where I've got to go back into education and have to pay for that and maybe take the time off to do it? So as you'll have picked up, the person who I've described my podcast for, yeah, it's me. And so, yeah, I started the podcast really to explore some of these things by talking to these two categories of guests, the people who've made the changes, so myself and my listeners can get some kind of inspiration from them about the sorts of things that are possible, and then the coaches to help you figure out, well, what is wrong. Is it just a mindset thing? I've got a couple of episodes which are all about whether the problem is the place that you're working, or whether it's actually you and it's the outlook, or whether it's a situation where your values just don't align with the work that you're doing and you need to do some work on that. Or it could be colleagues, and maybe it's just a question of finding the right way of expressing yourself to colleagues so that you maybe get on with them a bit better, particularly if, say, you've got a difficult boss and it's actually just a communication problem. So, yeah, so in a nutshell, that's pretty much what the podcast's all about.
I think it's a great idea. I think it's definitely a podcast that I know a lot of my listeners could get appreciated with, especially for those, my target demographics tends to be a little bit more millennials and then the college students. So definitely there's people out there that are we serve in those areas, but maybe somebody can relate to different, and that's what's great about podcasts. Everybody can relate to different people. So it's a really good vision that you have of the show, and applaud you for doing that. You hit on something there too that I kind of get aggravated with, is that people, when they get downsized, when they get laid off, when they change careers, they automatically have in their head, okay, I got to make less. And some of you may, and I'm not saying you won't, because it depends on what career field and what the market demands and what jobs are paying. But why can't we think of it from a positive attitude as, hey, I just got downsized. This might be a great opportunity to make a lot more money and something I actually do like to do. And so I think a lot of people, what they do is they become, very scared, and they're like, okay, so I've got to go down, 10 income levels to get something right away. And maybe you do have for a little while. But I think we missed the mark because we automatically take the bar from where it was and we say, okay, we're going to move the bar down here, and we're not going to look for any jobs that may be even better paying, maybe where more of our passions lie, because we need it right now. And so I think I try to get people to get in that mindset of, what about it gets better? And so for you being a lawyer, I think you have a powerful story because you obviously do make a certain standard of income. Have you had pressures around you saying, Jeremy, what are you thinking? Like, you're a lawyer and you're trying to embark on a different journey. Have you had any pushback? Because I know my students get pushback from their parents or even their friends saying, dude, you got an MD. Like, what are you doing getting away from it? Anything like that?
A little bit, fortunately, not a huge amount. My wife has been pretty supportive. My dad is, he's a bit more of the, the old school. You have a profession, you have a career, you do that for however many years. Um, yeah, I've had some friends who've said, "Oh, but what a waste! You're so good at it." But it's it's the sunk costs fallacy. If you're on the wrong path, then kind of the worst thing you can do is just stay on that path, because well, it might get better, but it probably won't if it's not for you. So yeah, yeah, fortunately, I've not had a huge amount of pushback, but I absolutely understand that people do get that. And I guess one of the things you can say to that is, yes, these people almost certainly have your best interests at heart, but they're not you. They don't necessarily know what's going on with you. And just because they've got their best interests at heart doesn't necessarily mean that they're right as well.
Very good. When so when you first got into law, you went to law school and you've been doing it a while. Was there ever a point that you did like it?
That is a really interesting question. So there's two aspects to that. I mean, I look back on my degree and kind of wonder why I did a law degree. The education system in the UK is a bit different, so you tend to do just kind of one subject, maybe two, rather than sort of a major and then lots of other things alongside. So I did a law degree. You don't actually have to do a law degree to become a lawyer in the UK. You can do a conversion course later on, and then do your law school, where you actually sort of learn the practice bits. And yeah, I wouldn't say that I was kind of in love with my degree. I mean, looking back, I'm not entirely sure what degree I would have done as an alternative, but that's what I did. In terms of the career, I mean, I've been doing it now for nearly 20 years. So it's definitely not been all bad. It's there's there's definitely been some highs, and it does give you certain skills and certain experience. So I've got, I'm, as a result of being a lawyer, very good at research, very good at problem solving, speak to a lot of clients. So I like to think, fairly decent at interpersonal skills. It plays to my very sort of analytical nature and personality. And there are certain aspects of it which, yeah, I really enjoy, and which I am going to look to take forward into whatever I do next. So I'm actually myself, with the help of a coach, working on things like my values and stuff, and realizing how important things like teamwork and collaboration and working with the right people is. How, when I've been involved with the projects which involve other people, and you get a sort of shared delivery, it's really exciting. It really appeals to me. A lot of what lawyers do, even if you're a part of a big firm, yeah, you might be on teams doing something, but quite often it is fairly solo. I mean, you might bounce a piece of work off someone and get a second pair of eyes, but quite often you're just sort of a bit plodding on by yourself. So I've realised, within the context of what I've been doing, what I really do enjoy is working more in teams, that more collaborative thing. So there's definitely lots of stuff that I've picked up and learned, and that have been positive experiences. And it's those that I really want to carry forward, as I say, into whatever it is I end up doing.
Yeah, and the reason I asked the question is because in the United States, the average millennial will change jobs every 3 years. I think there's been a paradigm shift from when our grandparents got out, got a factory job, stayed in a line and worked for 35 years, viewed it as a career. You got a nice retirement pension, and then you rode off and did golf all day. And so nowadays, what's happening is, and it's perfectly normal. I was in a similar situation where I got out. I actually loved my job at first. When I first got out of college, I really enjoyed it for a few number of years. And then all of a sudden, that dip started to happen, and I think that's what you're going through now, and we're very similar into that. I was like, God, I can't do this anymore. It was a good 10 years until I realized that. But at the time, like I said, if the fifth year loved it, sixth year loved it, seventh started to wax wane a little bit, eight got a little worse, nine, so I saw myself from going like this. And I think what happens is, as I try to tell a lot of people, is your passions, your interests, your strengths, your abilities change when you learn about yourself, when you learn about what you love to do, kind of like what you're doing now. So that's why I was asking if there was ever a moment. And it sounds like there's certain aspects, just like my job. I hated it, but there were certain elements that I liked. But I think, and then a lot of questions that I get, well, how do I know if I hate it? And I said, oh, you'll know. You'll know because you'll dread those Mondays. You'll rush to Fridays. You'll be stressed out. You will hate it. And so, or if you're starting to feel that way a little bit, maybe it is time to just start doing some investigational things on your part, some self-discovery. So that's the rationale behind the question. So I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think you being a lawyer and really transitioning says anybody can do this.
Yeah, and it's really interesting what you say about millennials kind of changing jobs every 3 years, because I think I'm technically Generation Y. I've never quite worked it out, so I'm kind of in this sort of midway point between, I suppose, my parents' generation, the older generation, where you had the same job for 35 years, and those who are changing jobs more frequently. So I'm kind of maybe not changing jobs as frequently, but realizing that there are these options out there. And, part of me does actually realize that I was probably in the right place to start having this sort of thinking and maybe doing this kind of exploration, possibly 5, maybe even 10 years ago as I look back, but never at the time really thinking, I suppose, that there were alternatives, or thinking what the alternatives might be, or maybe just allowing myself to be suckered into the thinking that, hey, what am I complaining about? I'm in a good job. This is good. It's I work with nice people. I'm in a well respected, well paid career. I should stick with it. And as I say, it's taken quite a long time for me to kind of turn my head round and realize there's definitely other possibilities out there. And I'm very much still mid transition. As I said, I am still doing it, but I'm glad that I am going through the process, even if it takes a while. It's an interesting journey.
And two more questions for me. One is kind of a multimodal question. So the question for me is, people are out there listening. You said that you're working with a career coach. When should people get a career coach? How do they find one, and why should they do it?
There is a vast wealth of material out there about career change. There's your podcast, there's my podcast, there's a million and one books, there's a billion and one articles. There's multiple forums on things like Reddit where you can ask questions and learn about career change. What I realized, and even having, interviewed 80 plus, actually more like 90 plus people on my podcast and learned a huge deal, I realized that I needed the accountability of having someone else, someone that I personally was working with, who was, had my own interests at heart, who could kind of tailor make the approach with me. So, it's quite difficult to self motivate sometimes. I think when you read articles and you read a book and you think, oh yeah, no, that was very interesting, then you put it to one side and forget about it. Whereas having the accountability of having a coach, having someone that you've got to show up to, who's given you the exercises, and you've got to show up at the next session having done the exercises, I realized that's what I needed. So I think that's probably a good indication that you might need a coach, when you kind of realize that you just can't necessarily do it all by yourself, and that you need a bit of structure to it. In terms of how you find a coach, I actually have an interview on my podcast which is called something like "Why Everybody Needs a Coach," and we go into that question. Um, Personal recommendations are always great. I've worked with a couple in the past, and one of them was a personal recommendation. The one I'm working with at the moment, she was actually a previous guest on my podcast, and she said a lot of stuff that really resonated with me. She actually contacted me in the first instance to be on the podcast, and then a little while later, when I realised I needed to work with someone, and I'd interviewed several career coaches on my podcast, I thought, yeah, okay, I'm gonna go back to her and see if she's interested in working together, and so that's what we've done. You asked three questions. I'm not sure if I've answered three
You
of them.
answered them all: when, how, and why. Um, and I think you said it best. You know, career coaches are worth their weight in gold. And I just don't mean financially. I do mean financially because a lot of them, let's say you work with a career coach, you spend 6 sessions, it may seem expensive on the front end. You invest it, let's say the average is like 150 USD per hour. You do 6 sessions. Their sessions will vary from person to person. So I'm just making a number here. That's $900. A lot of you might be saying, whoa, that's a lot of money. But let's say that career coach gets you into a job where you're making 15% or more of your salary next year. You almost 12-fold doubled that money. So the money shouldn't be the issue. It's really an investment to get yourself better. Second of all, it gets you out of a work you love. So for me, out of a work job you don't like. And so for me, it was an investment in my health because my health was declining. You can't put a price on your health, folks. And so that's where if you find yourself stressed out, anxiety, depressed, having a bunch of health problems related to the job front, it's really where you need to put your money into a coach. And so I would just intervene there. Jeremy, where can people, so you mentioned your show, you told us about it, but let's say people are out there listening. They want to find, first of all, tell us the name of your show, where they can find it, and anything else you'd like to say.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. I haven't actually said what the name of my podcast is. So, my podcast is called Change Work Life, and the best place to find it is my website, which very simple is changeworklife.com. So it's all one word, changeworklife.com. You can listen to every episode on the website itself. There's a player for each episode. Or alternatively, if you go to changeworklife.com/subscribe, there's links to where you can find it on most of the major platforms. If it's not listed on there, then I think you can find the RSS feed on there and put it into any podcast app. So yeah, you'll almost certainly be able to find it. Also, if anyone is interested, I have a couple of exercises on my website which people might find quite useful. There's one exercise which is about looking back to find out more about what you have enjoyed. So it's an exercise which involves going back through your previous, say, 5 or however many positions and picking out the things which you've particularly enjoyed and picking out the things which you haven't particularly enjoyed and seeing what patterns come through, which personally I found was a very useful exercise. And then the second one is all about looking to the future and picking a date, say 5 years, figuring out what life might look like. So, in terms of different aspects, your financial aspects, the health aspects, your personal and social life, that kind of thing, and getting quite detailed on what that might look like, painting quite a detailed picture, and then using that as a basis for making decisions with your career. So, one of my first guests on my podcast asked this amazing question, which was, what do you want your job to do for you? People never think about it in those terms. What lifestyle do you want your job to support? And so the point of this exercise is really to paint the picture of that lifestyle. So then as you go through and make decisions about your job and career, you can look at that picture and think, well, does this fit in with that? Is it going to help me get there? So yeah, the exercises are on my website, changeworklife.com/happy, HAPPY, or there's a link which says find career happiness. So yeah, if any of what I've said has resonated and you're interested in seeing what the results are, then do take a look.
Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining the show today. This has been a great conversation. I think a lot of people can get a lot of useful tips on it. We do appreciate you coming on the show and being part of it.
It's been my pleasure.
And guys, for you out there listening, we're getting ready to end the show, but also we're going to be putting those links into the YouTube video. So in the comment section, you'll find that information about Jeremy's show. So you'll be able to join it that way. Until next time, you guys take care, stay safe, and have a great day.